Bunch of yahoos. Just
Wait.
don't know how to shut up.
Apparently, I am not plugged in.
To what?
Oh, probably his Chromebook.
Henry's a robot.
Beep,
Yes,
boop, boop, beep.
I am those things.
All right, so we all got headphones.
There we go. Headphones.
Good to go.
Microphone. Witty charm.
Oh,
Yes.
crap. I forgot mine.
You're listening to the Kaiju Apostle Podcast, a Godzilla podcast for hardcore and casual fans alike, and everyone else in between.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in to the Kaiju Apostle Podcast. My name is David, and joining me, as always, is the A1, Chris Wormaskirch. How you doing, Chris?
Time 3, I'm doing great. I think we are going to nail this show.
Yeah, that's definitely not going to happen.
Well.
But joining us is the ineffable Henry the host. Say hi, Henry.
Hello and welcome to It Came From a Monster Movie. This joke's still relevant after a night of this.
Yeah.
48 hours of fun.
This is our third take at this episode, but I think what's making this work is we can all see each other.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. So
This is the first
works-
episode that I'm wearing clothes.
See, I was going to make that joke too. There we go.
I mean, I'm wearing grumpy pants. Grumpy cat pants right now. I'm wearing grumpy pants right now.
Yeah,
Jeans.
he's been insufferable.
I have been.
But no, this is actually the third time we've tried doing this episode. We tried for about an hour and a half last night. And,
Was it only an hour and a half?
It felt a lot longer. Yeah, we started at 8:30 and we may have actually been closer to about 2 hours.
8:30 for you guys, by the way.
Yeah.
Just putting that on the East Coast side for me.
And then we heard Luba just super pissed the whole time.
Oh, it was great. But at least they have my Disney Plus they could watch.
Yeah.
Speaking of Disney Plus, The Mandalorian.
With the same
Let's,
3 letters as the movie we're discussing.
Yeah,
Yes.
you guys are missing a lot.
The Matango tats.
All right, so if this actually goes through, we can talk about that a little bit at the end. But Henry, why don't you introduce yourself, talk about your podcast a little bit.
So, sorry, I'm just distracted by my lesbian better half.
If only we all had
Anyway.
one of those.
So, if you haven't picked up or listened to my show, or listened to David and Chris talk about my show on their show, I'm the host for It Came From a Monster Movie. We started when I moved back officially to America, because I was just, living in Korea for 5 years, and then I moved back, didn't know what to do, and instead of looking for a job, I messaged my best friend, Zach, who I've known since 6th grade, and he loves music, he loves editing, and we've always wanted to do something creative. And I was like, Zach, and he's like, what if I did a podcast about what I do naturally, which is trick people into my home to watch monster movies and talk about them, but we try and do something out of it. And we now have almost 50 episodes. We have 5 stars on iTunes, and I just have started selling shirts and merchandise, and we should have a Patreon next year and a YouTube channel, maybe. But it's super cool, and we do all sorts of stuff, and I get all sorts of guests, like Luba is a beekeeper, and she talks about bees. My friend Jeff goes on the show and talks about his marine biology with squids. It's all sorts of cool stuff, and you get guests like Matt Frank, who I killed apparently, and Clever Fangirl on Instagram is there too, and she does Jurassic Park stuff and is my host for Jurassic June. So Anyway, super cool stuff. And I'm here to be on this episode because David's a really cool guy, one of my favorite fans. And I like listening to Chris when I'm in the mood to hate myself.
This is coming from the fact that we finally gotten our money back from the paleontology department.
Yeah, I'm not bitter at all. Like, do you remember any of the conversations of paleontology we had last night?
Yeah, we talked about Indiana Jones.
And that he is...
the real guy he was based off of.
There you go.
The dog.
Very good.
Sean Connery's son. He found like Nazi dinosaur bones or something, right?
That is the most epic episode of Wishbone I've ever watched.
So this is the Kaiju Apostles' attempt at reconciliation with the Bone Doctor, because we need some of that sweet advertising money.
Don't call me that. Do not call me the Bone Doctor.
Sorry, I know you prefer it when it's the Bone Doctor.
Oh God.
Anyway,
this is what happens when you take 3 times to do an episode about mushrooms.
Hey, we could all hate each other.
We could.
yeah, that's very true. But yeah, Henry, I'm really glad you're here. I don't even remember how I found your podcast initially, but
I think it was actually me. I think you were having a contest for my buddy John, who does Robo 7.
Oh, yeah. I was doing a giveaway.
You were giving away his stuff, and I was just like, oh, you seem like a cool person to know on Instagram. And then you started liking my stuff, and then we started chatting, and it was very lovely.
Yeah, I've been a fan of listening to your episodes for a while now. It's I tried listening to Tsunami last night. I don't think I told you that. Oh. And I was so not having watched the film at all. It's so confusing, and
you should tell Chris about that film. You should at some point, because that film is just nuts.
Yeah, I need to see it. That's why sometimes I'm listening to these episodes with no point of reference at all, and it's almost more fun that way. But yeah, very, very thankful that you've joined us tonight.
No, I'm excited.
And for everyone who's never listened to our podcast, maybe you're coming over because of Henry. Our goal here is to watch, Japanese monster movies, right? And not just review them, because there's 100 podcasts out there, and it's all about suit designs and beam density and stuff like that. But our goal here is to recognize that these films were created in a specific context within history, right? There's reasons why these films came to be. And we also like getting into, like the ethics and the religious tones and all that. And really, we're not here to try to say there's only one way to watch a film. We're just here to try to encourage people to think a little differently, to dive a little bit deeper. And even, like I said, you don't have to agree with us by the end of the episode, but if you could watch one of these films and be like, oh, I didn't think about that, then I would say we did our job.
And that's the beauty of the monster movie genre as a whole. Like, they're movies that not just like, I like to call them modern day fairy tales, because they are stories of knights and dragons. But the cool thing about it is most monster movies have some form of social identity to them. Godzilla's the bomb. Jaws is actually based off a real event and talks about, all that stuff. And then I'm sure I made a better analogy last night when we... Jurassic Park, thank you for reminding me of my own bit. But Jurassic Park with the... Oh, man. Take 3s, guys. But
take 3s.
I think once we actually start talking about this movie, we'll sound much better and not just like, this is a take 3.
Speaking of take 3, Take 5 by Dave Brubeck is a great song.
That's a person.
Yeah, it is.
All right, this is the podcast where we make Henry listen to new music, and he reacts live to these songs that we're introducing him to.
Okay, anyway, so yeah, let's go ahead and get in the episode. We are discussing the 1963 film Matango,
or also known to me as the Matango.
Yeah. Yeah, last night it was priceless. He was like, and I think it was our first take, he was like, and both of these films have the first 3 letters, same 3 letters.
Yeah, The Mandalorian and Matango have the same first 3 letters.
And we didn't say anything for like an hour. Just laughed at him. Because we're good friends and not bullies.
That is a true sign of friendship with me. You are laughing at me, and I'm like, yeah, they're laughing with me because I'm funny. Thumbs up.
That's
finger
why.
guns.
Yeah.
But Henry, could you read the synopsis of the film for us?
Sure. I will read the synopsis of the film that is also known as The Attack of the Killer Mushroom People. No, that's not its name. Attack of the Mushroom People. The synopsis of this film is... all right. Acting chops. Community theater. Let's go. A yacht carrying 7 passengers ends up stranded on a beautiful but haunted island inhabited by giant mushroom monsters. The camaraderie that they had at the beginning of the voyage dissipates, and in the midst of chaos resulting in mutiny, sabotage, and murder. Will any of them make it back to Tokyo alive, or are they destined to become one with the island alongside countless others? Da-na-na-na. Mushrooms.
The way you said sabotage there made me think of the episode of The Office where they go to the beach and it's Dwight and Angela. It's like sabotage.
I can't hear the word murder without thinking of muck duck.
Muck duck.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's our Office podcast.
Yeah. So staff-wise with this film, we do see director being Ishiro Honda. Screenplay is Takeshi Kimura. Producer is Tomoyuki Tanaka. Music was Sadao Beku, which, looking into that, I think this is the only kaiju film he ever worked on. He was a jazz musician or jazz composer. And then this was based on the short story The Voice in the Night by William Hope Hodgson. Cast, we have fan favorite Akira Kubo, who plays Kenji, a psychology professor. We have Kumi Mizuno, who plays Mame. She is a singer. And Henry, I will let you, what is her other role in this film?
She is a top lady.
Top lady.
She's a strong, independent woman that need no man.
Yeah, but the men need her in this film.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Then we have Hiroshi Koizumi. He plays Sakuta, the yacht skipper. Kenji Sahara plays Koyama, the skipper's right-hand man. Hiroshi Tachikawa plays Yoshida. He's a film writer. And then we have Yoshio Tsuchiya. He plays Kasai, the yacht owner. And then Miki Yashiro plays Akiko. She is a university employee where Kenji is professor. And so this film... God, I feel like I've said this 3 times. According to Japanese critics... What?
We are at the 13-minute mark, so keep going. Good job, everybody.
Yeah.
We made it.
Thanks,
We made it to
Squadcast.
13 minutes.
So according to Japanese critics, this is one of the best Japanese films of all time. I thought that was really interesting going through David Klatt's book. I wasn't expecting a Matango, section in this book. But doing a little bit more research, this was brought up by a Reddit user, the Black Swordsman 97. I didn't realize the Matango laugh was actually repurposed for Alien Baltan in the Ultra series.
Oh, that's actually a really fun fact.
Yeah. Once he pointed that out, I pieced it together, which was fun. But it looks like Steven Soderbergh, who did everything from Ocean's trilogy to Magic Mike, he was going to adapt the film, but that didn't go through. Yeah, it's kind of a shame. I mean, I really would like to see Channing Tatum in this. Then, okay, so if this cut's weird, it's because we just made a bunch of mushroom puns for the past minute. So go ahead, Henry.
So this is my cue to go, when I did my episode for this movie, I found an interesting fact about how this movie was actually almost banned in Japan because... Actually, I'm remembering what I said last night, so hopefully I'll be able to say it correctly again. What is interesting about this film and why it is a powerful film for this time of Japan, it is Toho going back into atomic horror properly, which they haven't really done since Godzilla 54, because as I mentioned last night and I'm going to mention now in this present episode, Godzilla's design is terrifying, not because of what he represents, but also the fact that physically what he represents, and that his skin is the way it is because he's supposed to represent a burn victim from the atomic bomb, which makes it an even more powerful film that Godzilla's design is so interwoven into the views of people, a nation who witnessed and experienced the bomb on civilians, unlike any other country really has. And what's very interesting is Matango goes back into that root of exploring a topic that is still pretty taboo at the time, and even today it's still pretty taboo to talk about the bombs at this kind of depth. And the film was almost banned because of how it portrayed the evolution of the creatures themselves, which we will obviously talk about later on in the film episode. But I find that very fascinating that this film is such like a popular but like plays with taboo a lot more than 54 ever did with atomic horror, in a sense.
Yeah, and that's what's so crazy though. Like, you say it's Toho going back to that, but, and I don't think this is necessarily penalized because of this specifically, but it's interesting, like, for how successful it was. You know, they made back twice the budget. Toho wanted, Honda and Kimura to only work on normal, like, these not really run-of-the-mill, but just like typical monster films. Like, this was a passion project, right? And then it's like he almost gets penalized for doing that. And I don't think it's because of the subject material. It's just interesting that, like, he goes back to what got him into this genre, and then yeah.
Well, this is also the era where they start realizing that, like, oh, we can make more money with these movies with children than we could ever do with adults, which is, like, kind of funny because most Godzilla fans I know are in their, like, 30s and 50s and just, interesting, delightful, unique people who I sit there going, like, how do you function? How do you do what you do?
Chris and I can relate with that in Star Wars, can't we, Chris?
Yeah, that's kind of the question I ask myself every single day, really.
Yeah, that's. Did you see that direct message I sent you on Twitter earlier, Chris?
Which one?
Yeah, we won't get into it if you don't see it then. But yeah, I mean, it's with fandoms in general. You're right. They were gearing towards kids. Because obviously the adults have to want to go because they're paying for it, right?
Right.
But it was weird. Like, you see a Shiro Honda, it's like, it's a very, you can tell a lot of time and attention was put in this film. And then now he's being relegated to doing monster films, Godzilla films, really. And obviously with the podcast, we're going to see different ones like Atragon, which is actually one of my favorite films of this era.
Oh, so you are doing that one.
Yeah, we are doing Atragon.
Cool.
And then, but what's interesting is with Kimura, though, like, he felt like this was his best screenplay, his best work. But because of what Toho did here, he had he went by a different name for all of his future films just because he was so frustrated. So yeah, it's interesting. I definitely wasn't expecting all of this when I did research on the movie. So, Henry, I know that you've already done this on your podcast, which if you guys haven't listened to that, make sure you listen to that after this episode.
Or before, whatever. You could pause now and hit and, make some
just make it a big podcast sandwich. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
because I should actually preface that on this episode, we're reviewing the Japanese version, while my episode reviews the English version of the movie, and I'll be able to throw in some tidbits about some of the differences between the two, because the English and usually with these films, the English and the Japanese are like completely different films. Watching Godzilla vs. Mothra on the Criterion Collection, my first time seeing it in proper Japanese, and I'm sitting there like, this is a completely different movie from and this is my favorite movie of the Toho era, of this era of Toho. So it's insane how different these films can be, even though they're the same footage, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, that's how I definitely felt when I watched the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla for the first time. I was like,
I'm excited.
What have I been missing for 30 years?
I'm keeping that privilege to myself when we do the episode in season 2 of my show to celebrate Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
Or however people want to say it.
If we ever get a trailer and if the movie's ever released.
It's released in March, isn't it? Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh,
February.
too
Got
soon.
it.
Yeah, that's low-hanging fruit.
It was delayed with Black Widow.
But, Chris, so obviously we've been watching, all these different Godzilla films pretty much up to this point. Varan and Mothra obviously have been exceptions, but, like, those are monsters you had heard about before. So going into Matango, having no point of reference at all, like, what were your thoughts before watching the film?
None. Literally, I've been trying to, for you, our loyal listeners, have been trying to go in just completely blind. Like, literally, the only thing I see from these movies is, like, the cover art, maybe. And sometimes that's only to make sure I'm watching the right movie. So, because there are times that, like, I'll hear these monster names, like, what was the one you just, Etrigon or something? And I'm like...
It's not a monster, actually.
Oh, no. I'm like, well, see? That's part of the problem. So,
yeah.
Coming into this one, I had no idea what... I was trying to, like, rack my brain, like, oh, should I know this one? Maybe he's the big 3-headed one. Or maybe he's, like, the 1996 Godzilla. I don't know. So, when it was, like...
the 1996 Godzilla Matango.
For all I know.
It's a big flying turtle with tusks.
Yeah. But you already know I know King Ghidorah because I ship the 3rd head with the transformed mushroom people now. So.
Oh, yeah. That was in the uncut version of this episode's first take.
Yeah. So anyway, now we'll move into my first impressions actually having seen the movie. This one was a little shocking. Like I was saying, it's more horror based. It was definitely creepier. I'm so used to like jump scare horror that this kind of creepy psychological horror was a nice change of pace. But like I was explaining last night, the scariest movie I've ever seen is The Quiet Place.
Which, sure, okay, that's your journey. And going into it, I asked you this last night as well. You didn't know that they were mushrooms. You didn't know that the creatures themselves were going to be mushrooms, which is fascinating because, like, you oddly enough don't see a lot of monsters that are mushrooms. Like, off the top of my head, it's Matango, the mushroom monster from Primeval, the British TV show, which, if you haven't watched, go check it out because it's brilliant. And then also the creatures in the Last of Us PlayStation 4 game, which are based off the cordyceps mushrooms, which are real creatures. And Chris, I think you got logged out before I told you that, like, there are actual mushrooms in Southeast Asia that do kind of what Matango does, which is pretty much they are parasitic spores that kind of zombify insects and then literally like blossom out of the insect and take control over it until it's ready to create more spores. And like ants have learned to see the signs of a zombie ant, and they'll actually take the infected ant and move it as far away from the colony as they can before this thing like blooms. And like it turns out cordyceps mushrooms have evolved for each species of insect that it is in its habitat.
That's crazy.
It's a whole planet Earth thing, which is super cool to watch, and I love showing it to children when I teach because, you know, nature be crazy and wonderful, and, you know, be scared of your mushrooms, which also could be aliens because the fossil record's very unsure about where they came from, and most early fossils of mushrooms and fungi are found near or on meteorites. So there's that. Have fun with those thoughts at night tonight.
Well, I'll still be thinking about, when you talk about mushrooms growing on insects, I'm just thinking of the Pokemon Paris.
Yeah,
and
which
I'm
is based off the cordyceps.
Oh my gosh. It's like, that's one of those things where Pokemon's like secretly like super like dark and fascinating, but all I can think about is chubby Pikachu.
Yes.
Anyway, should we talk about mushroom people again?
Yeah, so obviously not having a lot of exposure to what this was before. I mean, I love that you've been committing to this, you know, because for me, I've had friends like Alex, who's Alex Collects Monsters on Instagram. I mean, he's talked up Matango for the longest time. So I was excited to be able to go into this finally and, recognizing a lot of the actors too. Like, I really do like Akira Kubo. I'm really excited to do Invasion of the Astro Monster here soon.
Yeah.
But what I wasn't expecting is going into the film right off the bat, we start out with the ending. Like, that's something that hasn't happened in these films yet. And I really can't think of any other films that do that as well. And I just think this kind of lends to the fact that this was more, not that Ishiro Honda ever really wanted to direct just a film, right? But this was definitely like his art house film. And it's a framing technique you don't really see in monster films. So I know, Henry, you're telling me that there's some differences between the American and the Japanese version that kind of like...
The opening... So I attempted watching the Japanese version last night before we all started our wonderful journey of take 1, take 2, and then eventually me drinking wine with Luba, watching new shows on Netflix.
Didn't you watch Witches of Waverly Place?
We did watch Witches of Waverly Place, but then we also started watching a really cool show on Netflix called Great News, which I would recommend so far. But staying on task. I was staying on task to tell you. Okay, so in the English version of the opening, because the Japanese opening is very ominous and very scary, because it opens up with the main character in the psychological ward, the professor, and he's saying like, "You're gonna think I'm crazy," and it's a conversation between the doctors and him. You hear the two different voices, and he's just saying like, my friends, everyone died but one, but like, I can't really say they died because they're alive and well right now. But me explaining to you why that's true is going to make me sound even more crazy. While in the English version, he's kind of talking to himself. It's only the one, all the dialogue is just from him. But what's weird is he says that I'm the one that died and everyone else lived. And you're just like, what do you mean? You're the one that died. But it's not as powerful as the Japanese version. And in fact, like, my guests said that like it kind of ruined the film for them. Also, when we read the Rotten Tomato summary is literally the whole movie word for word, which we did not realize until the episode itself. And that's why I don't do Rotten Tomato summaries anymore. But
I thought it was because they tanked King of the Monsters.
Well, that's other Godzilla fans' journeys, and I don't want to go into the cluster that is that. But it's very interesting how, and you see this a lot with the Japanese monster movies in English dubs, where in Japan these movies are actually like powerful pieces that are explaining social things in Japan and just relations and horror and like elements of like, the first time I saw 54, I never realized how scary Godzilla was. But then you get the English versions of these films and it's, the campy, it came from a monster movie vibe that I love so much, of just these movies, not being as serious as originally intended. And Matango, it's scary in English, but it doesn't translate well, like as well and as powerful as it is in its original language. So
yeah, and we've had that discussion, me and Chris, about not being elitist when it comes to subs and dubs, right? I mean, because there is definitely a temptation to do that, especially in anime. But when it comes to these films, I talk to a lot of people who are just like, oh, well, the Showa films they're campy, they're silly, whatever the case is. And then I'm like, well, are you watching the Japanese or the American version? And they're like, well, the American, the dubbed. I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, when you watch these films and they're in Japanese, they're very rarely silly. They're comedic, sure, but they're not silly.
Yeah.
And that's what with this film, I mean, there wasn't really much humor at all, kind of in the beginning, right? Like there's that one part where Kenji Sahara's character, I guess it's Hiroshi Koizuma, the skipper, he's like, hey, you can listen while you work. But then Kenji Sahara's like, well, I want to look too. Like it's just that it's not necessarily ha 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 funny, but I mean it is humor of like we're starting to see.
Well, also that you go on. Sorry, David, I interrupt. Good. Well, I was just saying, like, that humor sets up kind of why what this movie's like main message is, which is talking about something that I have experienced firsthand when I was living in Seoul, is the fact that where this film is taking place in an age where Japan is getting rid of its empire days and embracing the westernization of American culture, and how it's trying to set into an international field while trying not to get everyone upset about what they did in World War II. But, you know, the people we meet are people of high life, the professor, the writer, and they all have notions about them that are traditional but also taboo, and still traditionally taboo. It's one of the reasons why, like, I love Kumi Mizuno's character in this, because she's the singer, she's the top lady, but like they literally like shame her. Like, if she's not married or dating, obviously she's just sleeping around, because what else do women do when they're not in those two camps? But like, what's interesting is like the jokes are funny to us because culturally we're used to jokes like that. But in Japan, those jokes are a little bit like, you know, if I could just imagine there being like a little bit of like concern about like how these people are just living this high life and da 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 da. Like, the skipper could almost be the representation of traditional Japanese, because he gets upset like, I'm the skipper, I'm in charge of this boat, but you're just a daddy's boy with lots of money, and you don't know the first thing about like a hard day's work. And I just like, it's very fascinating what it goes into. And it's interesting though, like, and something I've been wanting to bring up for the past 48 hours is to add to this taboo. It's interesting, like, where did you find that Akiko is the uni employee? Because in my research, I always was told that she was his student, which added a layer of more of the taboo of why she's so like ashamed, because she's dating her professor, which leads to her like parental issues that we see later on in the film.
Yeah, and I've got to double check. I thought it was in the film, and then when I went to Wikizilla, they had her listed as an employee as well. But like, my assumption was that she was a student, yes, but obviously, you know, you can work on campus as well.
Right.
So it almost seemed like there was kind of that relationship of she's coming on as not just as a student, but maybe as like, there was not like a sexual relationship. Yeah. But it definitely didn't just seem like a student-professor relationship. But I don't know. But I just went off of the wiki page. Right. And that's what I had there.
I mean, regardless, it still makes very compelling storytelling, and going more into the analogies of like breaking social norms. Because like, you know, she later on has her whole dealio with her mother, which represents those traditional concerns that, you know, the Japanese held still near and dear to them, and still do to this day.
Can we talk about that part? Because of course. I was going through, and I remember they're out collecting food, and all of a sudden you just hear, Akiko, this is mother, and like, that's it. And it was so confusing to me. Like, do you guys get into that? And like, is there anything different in the American version? Because that's literally, I mean, Chris, the version you watched, that was all you got, right?
Yeah, and it was kind of...
Wait, did it not show her mother?
I was like, did I miss something?
Did it? Because in the version, I remember distinctly, it actually shows her mother.
Not so.
And her mother, like, is scolding her on what she is doing on that island.
He was mistaken on the next Arrested Development.
Which is why she starts, like, kind of breaking down, because she's just, like, ashamed. She doesn't want to be this whole thing, which I find very interesting, you know?
Yeah, I don't, because I watched it twice for this, and I remember that as the note where I'm like, I don't remember seeing anything at all.
No, we talked about it. It was something that Marilyn, one of my guests that episode, really liked. It was either Marilyn or Zach, because they really liked the fact that, like, Akiko is young. Like, you know, she's still learning herself. You know, she's, you know, leaving the family. there's a lot of pressure that to be married. There's a lot of pressure that she has to do, but then she's like joined into this like hip club of night people who like have money and are this and that, and like, you know, obviously this is a fiction because the professor is the cool cat of the group, but like it's very fascinating to see how this movie really goes into just it. I don't know. I just like, after living in Korea for a long time, it was just one of those things that I noticed. There's that whole divide between the new age of thinking and trying to be more open about things. But then, like, you know, traditional older generations are concerned about like, but if we move on, how do we know we are what we are? You know, these are our core beliefs and they change over time, sure. But like, you know, some of the things that they do are pure American westernizations, and you know, to some cultures that's terrifying because like, what kind of identity do they have left if they just start, you know, drinking soda and playing the ukulele without playing the ukulele?
Oh yeah, on the boat. Yeah,
that was Luva's favorite part of the movie. She was just like, I really like how she is playing the ukulele off screen, and now she's not doesn't even have it in its hands, and it's still playing.
Yeah, you know, someone's just out of frame, just pulling it away from her.
Right? She's like, this is how you play it, correct? Yes. Bring it over here. We'll trick the audience. No one will notice that slip of hand.
So
that's awesome.
So Henry, from what I'm gathering, is you see this film as almost like a fear of losing cultural identity. Is that right? Just like the assimilation. So Chris, because my interpretation of this film actually lines up with that, but it's from a different perspective. It's something we've touched on with a previous film. So Chris, like, what was, because I know you said it was almost like the last line kind of clinched it for you. So like, what was your takeaway from this film?
Well, and part of it, the last line, the humans are the monsters. I think we've been getting there. I think it was with Varan that I was making similar comments where the kaiju were showing us how we're supposed to act in community because the two of them were being a better pair than the two humans that we met at the beginning of the film. But after Henry had mentioned last night that there's the theme of temptation that runs through the movie, I can't help but see that now as like the mushrooms as some sort of metaphor for the Western culture and what happens when you take just a single bite. You get addicted. You can't break away. You become westernized and you become this terrifying amalgam of mushroom and human, and it's just a fungus. And even when he comes back, he still has part of that with him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think some of our discussion has reframed my thought a little, but yeah, just thinking about the fact that how easily the humans became the monsters was my initial take. Like they had resisted, but then like there's just after a while there's nothing you can do. You're going to succumb. You're going to become one of them. You're going to assimilate. And like when they were using the bleach to clear the ship away, it like looks like you can kind of clean it up. But in the end, the rot isn't on the outside, it's the inside.
Yeah. No, that's good. And the temptation's a really big thing, right? I mean, we see everyone eventually falls into temptation at some point, one or another, whether it's the mushrooms or whatever else the case may be. Because I think for me, like, the ending's really prolific, but the quote that stood out to me is when, he says, under trying conditions, man tends to become selfish and cruel. That's when we must act in a rational manner. We must help each other. And for me, I felt like this film, and I think it could tie into Westernism to a certain degree, but for me, it felt like we see our characters becoming less human. And not like just in a monster sense, but you know, what I wrote was like, whether it's the men desiring women for their own sake, right? It's this carnal desire. It's not something that's self-giving as sex should be, or anything else. The time on the island sees our characters devolving into inhumanity, which is complete selfishness and carnality. And that's what I feel about this film is everyone except for Kenji is selfish. And it's something that they take and they take and they take and they consume with little to no regard for anyone else, right? So we see, Kasai, he goes in and he well, you have the God, why'd I scroll away? You have Yoshida and Koyama, they're down eating the food before everyone else, right? They don't tell anyone, like, hey, there's food here. They just take it for themselves, right? And then, Kasai sleeps in his own place. He doesn't want to help. He doesn't want to do anything. And then even, Sakuda, the skipper, like that, who you kind of expect to be a moral compass, after Kasai is like, hey, why don't we just take all this food and go away? He tells him like, hey, why are you doing this? Get off my boat. But then what does he do? He does that same exact thing. He goes and he takes the food. He locks Kasai up and he goes on his own. He's selfish. He wants to, take care of himself. And it eventually gets to the point where everyone consumes the mushrooms and they end up devolving into just this monster, right? Mm-hmm. But then at the end, even our main character, Kenji, isn't free from that. He's not, just because he doesn't partake of it himself, it still infects him to a certain degree.
I also would argue that I wouldn't consider him selfless. Like, I think as the movie goes, he becomes very selfish in not the traditional way of it. Like, he becomes very, like, we talked about in our episode, there's that really weird scene where Akiko is actually like breaking down because she's really struggling with not just like the social peer pressures, but the survival pressure of being on this island. Like, she is way out of her element. She's got literally the ghost of her mother still like nagging her about how she's failed as a child, pretty much. And like, you get that really weird moment where like Kenji hits her but kisses her, and then it's like, it's really weird because he is trying to keep her safe for his sake. It's not for anyone else's. He's trying to like make sure that what he is preaching, what he believes in, is true, and he's willing to do kind of really questionable acts to keep the sanity of it. And like, obviously with how this movie ends, it shows that like, he talks the talk, but obviously he doesn't walk the walk, because he himself also did it. And like with the skipper as well, it's very, for me, I find the skipper very tragic, because like I said, I feel like he is what like represents the traditional culture. And what does the traditional culture do? It leaves and dies. Like, and it sacrifices itself to prevent stuff from leaving too. He took the one way out because he felt like they didn't deserve it. And that is something that older generations sometimes can like give the impression of to the rebellious youth. And like, it's just, and what's funny is like all these characters become weaker because of these temptations. But, our favorite top later, played by Mizuno, she becomes more powerful because her beliefs are being accepted. And like, what I find funny is in this day and age, I feel like her character is a very strong, independent female character that you don't really see in old monster movies, and you think it's cool, but you realize that like in the time context, she's a villain, while like today she's like, experience what it means to be an independent person. And I find that like, that's why I find this film very fascinating. And like why I will recommend listeners who are from my show, or people who are tuning into yours who haven't seen this, like the English version is fine if you want a campy monster movie. But if you watch the Japanese version, you're going to get a lot more interesting social context. But I also feel like you can't fully understand that social context unless you don't understand the fact that a lot of countries don't want to be westernized and have their own cultures that have already been there. So it's just all, movie's fascinating.
And I want to clarify, Kenji's not a hero by any means. It's just, what's interesting, you see it a little bit more explicitly, I think is my point, right? So, Kasai feels scorned by mommy, right? Because she's only wanting to be with him for her own sake, which,
for Europe.
That's, yeah, exactly. So, at that one moment when she needs him most, he feels so scorned that he delivers her up to the forest, right? Nope, just go away with Yoshida. But what's interesting, and this is what I love about Kenji and Akiko, though, is like, even despite Kasai being a huge douchebag, like they still want to help him. Like they're still willing to help him, right? But then we start seeing. I think what David Collette says in his book sums up how I feel about it, even before I read it, is you survive by voluntarily surrendering your humanity. Like that's the only way these people can survive is when they give up. And they're like, nope, I'm just going to give in to these temptations, give in to this westernization, right? That's how people feel like they're going to survive. But ultimately, do we really know that? Could they have just kept persevering and survived and left the island without being contaminated?
Yeah.
We don't know.
What's the alternative? A Donner Party style?
And I mean, that's the kind of beauty of this film, and like why, I feel like while this film worked in 1963, why I feel like this film would be more powerful today. And going into something we talked about, bring this film to be a little bit more of a jump scare. Because this film has a lot of really good Japanese horror cliches into it, where it's more psychological, it's more of a slow burn. We don't technically see the monsters into the mid, because you see the in-between hybrid, like the turning, who's like stalking them. But like some of their reactions are not like what you would imagine, though granted in the English version their reactions just like, oh my god, this thing was on the boat, and then they're like, what thing, there was nothing on the boat. And it's just like the way it's portrayed in the English version, at least, it's just like, oh, they actually just don't want to talk about it, but they're not acting like the voices that you're hearing are not the voices of like, I don't want to talk about it. They're like, I don't want to talk about it because I don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, what are you talking about? Mushrooms? We're on a boat.
Yeah. And then, what's interesting, you're talking about the westernization, though, and I don't want to sound ignorant here, but at the end, he talks about how it's no different in Tokyo than it was on the island. And maybe, and that's where the shots are of all the neon lights and the skyscrapers and stuff like that.
Well, that's the thing that I always found the most powerful part of this movie was that line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's why when you brought that up, in my head, I'm thinking selfishness, not just in the sake of taking from other people just on the island, but what we see, and we talked about this with capitalism, at least Western capitalism, and the Japanese culture of how they handle economics, is it's a lot more communal, right? What can you do for your fellow man? But when we see bright lights, when we see these big buildings, I mean, we can disguise it up all we want, but at the end of the day, when we have all this architecture, it's built on the back of someone.
Yeah,
right.
There's
always someone who's going to be at the bottom of that pyramid. And that's why when I saw that scene, I wasn't thinking about westernization as much, but I was thinking about like, who has to suffer in order for people to prosper.
Right.
Yeah.
That's actually a really interesting aspect. I didn't think about that.
Well, because there's something about it too, and I'm kind of forming this thought as I say it out loud, which is my specialty, but I'm thinking comparing this to like Lord of the Flies, where they have to be brought to a separate island. And so, well, one, the difference is they're children in Lord of the Flies. Two, they're brought to a different island. And apparently they're only going to be this way on the island, not at school. And I think the end of this movie kind of suggests the way that they were on the island, the way they treated each other on the island, is going to be the same in Tokyo.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be removed from society to be monstrous in Matango. Whereas Lord of the Flies, you had to be monstrous and, fat children get crushed by boulders.
Yeah. And even what's interesting is I forgot about this. So Sakuda, right? He's the skipper.
Right.
Like he's literally purchased by Kasai. Like he's enslaved. Like, so it's just, you're right. But that didn't happen on the island. That was still something that was present where they came from. It's almost like this island was a magnifying glass to who these people really were.
And I mean, and that's the wonder about these like island horrors, is that they do become magnifying glasses. And like, just for me personally, one of the main reasons why I love the ending line of like, it's the same in Tokyo, is not just with like the people and stuff, but like I've actually been to Tokyo, and what I always find hilarious is, I don't know if you guys know, there are 3 Statue of Liberties in the world. The one in New York, the one in France, because it's the, remembrance that they did the one. And then Tokyo Bay has a Statue of Liberty in it.
I didn't know
it's
that.
like, yeah, there's a Statue of Liberty in Tokyo Bay, and then like Tokyo Tower is based off the Eiffel Tower, because Japan was in love with Parisian cultures. So it's like very interesting that like this film goes into not just like, you know, look at what these people are doing with their money. They're pretty much like making people who actually work for a living work more and just with disrespect, and not being like, you know, people are taken for granted. Like social norms are being taken for granted. And like, that's what makes these mushroom monsters truly terrifying, is because like, this is what happens when you take people for granted for so long. You become this monstrous thing of paradise, quote unquote. Which I find like, you know, it's the powerful thing about why I wanted to do this movie for Creepy March Madness on my show originally, when it was originally slated for Creepy March Madness, because when I was coming up with the idea of Creepy March Madness for movies analyzing monsters that do a mental psychological aspect, this was the first film I could think of, just because of like how many layers of fun guy are in this pun of reference David's
Amen.
face.
Yeah, and what I love about Akiko's character is you really get kind of you can develop some sympathy for that, right? Like, you know, so on the one hand, Kenji's willing to give up his food for her. So again, like, I think, yes, there's that self-serving of like, I need you, but I'm also very sympathetic to that, like, in the way that like, I do need my wife, you know, like, I can understand that, even though I'm kind of curious the dynamics between a professor and student relationship, but that's another discussion in itself.
Yeah.
But anyway, just the fact that like, you know, she's willing, like, she has no hope, and that's what drives her to the mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I can be sympathetic to that in the sense that like, you know, at this time, again, I'm speaking about things I don't truly understand, but you know, we're talking 2 decades removed from the bombs being dropped, right? And you're talking about people who have literally have to rebuild everything they had, their economy, you know, their social structures, their schools, their homes, everything. So the appeal of westernization, I can understand that. You know, I can sit here and try to decry capitalism all I want from a place of privilege, from a place of where I benefit from it. But I speak out and I can talk about how, you know, like, you know, Walter Brueggemann is one of my favorite theologians, and he gets really into like social justice and gets into, you know, economic powers and the way that, you know, we interact with others and where that comes from, you know, economically. You know, I could sit here and quote Brueggemann and all these different, you know, ethical and theologian people, but at the end of the day, I'm still doing it from a place where I benefit from it.
Right.
So I can sympathize because I understand that like, you don't want to give up your values, but you want to survive.
Yeah.
You want to have some kind of life. And at the end of the day, you would rather have a shred of that than nothing at all. You know, we're so scared of what would happen otherwise. So yeah, it's just funny, like going into this, I was not expecting such a deep film. Not that Honda hasn't given us a reason to think that so far, but not like this, where this, I could definitely see like why people consider this one of like the greatest films in Japanese history, because I mean, why wouldn't you?
And that's the thing, we've had plenty to discuss in previous episodes, even if the previous movies haven't had quite as much to talk about. But this one just kind of like, there's a reason Henry's doing this again, and isn't just repeating himself. There's so much in there still, which it's not, like you said, there's no reason to be surprised, but let's be honest, I'm still surprised.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's a very surprising film, and like, you know, in my episode, my guests literally say like the English dub was what kind of like made it hard for them to connect with, because, you know, it's a little bit more campy in the English dub, and the English dub is available, like, is the most accessible version of this movie, I think, because it's free on Amazon Prime. which is like nice. It is nice that this film has the ability to be accessed, but it's just a real shame that the Japanese cut is not as accessible, which also makes sense because, like, remember, Godzilla 54's Japanese cut wasn't super accessible in America until, like, I was in high school and back in 2009, because, like, that movie was literally, like, when they got the original cut of that film, and they were like, ooh, the American people don't know everything we did because of the bombs to Japan. We're keeping this on the DL. Like, my favorite example of, like, talking about how ignorant America was to the atomic bomb is from another monster movie. It came from Beneath the Sea, where they're on a nuclear submarine, and they think the reactor is leaking, and the captain tells one of the men to go into the reactor to see if it's leaking. And he goes, I'm not going in there. I read in a book that it's going to make me not have kids. And then they laugh. They laugh it as a joke. And the captain says literally, like, you shouldn't read everything you read in books. Because people back then thought if you drop a bomb, you're going to make ants big. Nobody thought, like, you drop a bomb and then, you know, children are literally incinerated and dying of cancer for the rest of their life.
But think about King of the Monsters. The whole joke when they're going into... Well, I don't want to spoil this for you, Chris, but there's a part where Bradley Whitford's character... earmuffs. You know, he's like, I'm not going any closer. I still want to have kids. Yeah. Like, that right there, I'm not going to blame him for that. But that's just one reason out of 100 why I think the film is pro-nuclear, even if people don't want to admit it. We just, or at least in the sense of it doesn't take the gravity of what the original film tried to say, right? Yeah. I still stand by the fact that the best scene in that film, and I say best being the most haunting film scene, and everyone agrees, I feel like, is when the mom holds her children. It's like, don't worry, we'll see Dad soon. Yeah. That right there just solidifies the fact that these are not just films about monsters. There is something so much more to say about it.
I also think one of the reasons why these movies are so much more powerful in Japanese than they are in English is because most of these movies are based off true events. Matango is actually based off something, if I remember my research correctly, this actually kind of happened. A bunch of, like, Japanese youth did get, like, lost at sea and never found again. And, like, they were on a yacht and all that jazz, and, like, this movie was released shortly after that news coverage. Which is the same with Godzilla 54. Lucky Dragon number 5 was still in the news. So when, like, people saw Godzilla opening night, they thought they were watching a newsreel recreating the Lucky Dragon number 5 incident. So, like, that's the thing that makes, like, Japanese monster movies have such the disconnect with, you know, why they're harder, quote unquote, harder to sell to American audiences, is because the events that led up to the creations are not covered here. So we don't have that kind of, like, oh God, this could really happen thing, unless, like, it's in the trailer. It'd be like, it could happen today, ? With that wonderful, like, trailer, 1960s monster movie trailer voice that I love so much.
Do you know who I think would do the best remake of this film? And I know it's kind of an easy answer. So this film reminds me a lot of magic surrealism. Yes. So it makes me think of Guillermo del Toro. So I watched Kronos here recently, and then obviously Pan's Labyrinth, and it's just the way he handles this kind of story.
That era,
you know, where it's yeah. Well, it's just there's enough of the supernatural, but it's still grounded in reality.
Oh, and that's what I love listened to my Shape of Water episode. That's right. You have not heard me rant about Del Toro and how I feel about Del Toro.
Oh, he said rant.
Like Del Toro.
No, that's fine. But, like, I love the way that, like, you can tell, like, when I watched Kronos the other night, like, I just sat there and I'm like, it hit me really hard, just the way, I mean, it's definitely not plausible, but his characters and the way that the world is set up, and that's what I love about, you know, magical surrealism, just in the literature genre. Like, you can read a story and you actually feel like it could happen even though you know it wouldn't.
For sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But
like, this is a fun film.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a fun film. It's a good time.
No, and
this
crap,
is fun.
I meant magical realism, not surrealism. Excuse me. I knew I was saying that wrong. So before we get into the listener questions, I just had a couple random comments because I usually have like 2 pages of notes when I watch these films. Mm-hmm. Do you guys remember when Koyama was going around trying to find food and then he walks into the women's bedroom and he seems to be found out and he rushes out?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like...
There's some weird parts. This is a very sexually charged Toho film, which is odd to see sometimes.
So Wikizilla said that it was apparently an accident, but I'm like, that was not an accident. I did think it was interesting that the dream sequence that Yoshida has, it's about him taking ideas from someone else's story for his own, which is interesting because this is an adaptation of someone else's short story. So I thought that was a little meta. But then what I noticed the second time that I didn't notice the first time is Sakuda would actually, he pockets the keys for the food storage and holds on to them. And it's just a really minor thing of like, if you pay attention to that, then it makes sense. It's like, oh wait, you know, the food pantry is unlocked and someone else is in there. You already know who it is. The first time, if you don't pay attention to that, it's kind of like, oh, how dare he? But then it's like, no, he was planning it for a while.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, yeah. Okay. So if you guys could pull up that tab or that link that I gave you guys for the questions. So we got a couple questions.
There goes my screen. Hold on a second.
No, you're good.
Do. Oh, this
Actually,
is nice.
Yeah, so before we do listener questions, actually, this is usually when we kind of give it a rating out of 5.
Yeah.
And I think compared to yours, we don't really publicize that rating, but I think it's fun to just kind of summarize. So, Henry, I don't know how you guys rated it on yours, but where did you land with this film?
So, I actually have it pulled up because I've been ready to do this the whole time. So, for the English version, because I will definitely say the Japanese version, like, I want to... Zach and I have actually talked about this, that we want to eventually revisit films and regrade them based off their original languages, because we ended up this with Troll Hunter, the Norwegian film. We watched the dub.
Ooh, yeah.
And I actually was surprised I didn't give it an A because I love it, but like the English dub definitely like niddles away points. And same thing happened to Matango. That's why I think it's an N, because I say it weird. So on my show, we gave it a C. A 19 out of 25, and our summary of the film is Gilligan's Island goes horribly wrong with mushrooms, an allegory of why Western culture is bad. Which we kept laughing about because one of them is literally dressed like Gilligan with his red shirt and hat. And like how this movie is like a very... Well, the English, I will say the English version does kind of portray this as like the horror film of Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, I could see that.
But like obviously the Japanese version is a bit higher than a C. I can't really say, but like on your scale, I would definitely give it 4.5 because there are some things that I think don't quite work, but they're small enough to like. I don't feel comfortable right now giving it a perfect 5 because it's been a while since I've seen the original Japanese version, and I know I loved it, but I want to revisit it now with the mindset of like I'm a host and a credible source about if these movies are good or not, and I really kind of want to save it for when I personally revisit the Japanese version with probably Zach or something later on in the future. But it's definitely like 4.5 for me on your scale, just knowing that it's better. Oodle's better than the English dub of the Attack of the Mushroom People.
Yeah. And just a reminder, we talked about it on the last episode, just because something's a 5 doesn't mean that it's perfect, because obviously you could have an A, but doesn't mean you got all the points.
Are we talking about the X from outer space?
I wish I liked that as much as you did.
Oh,
I need to watch that
film
again. So yeah, Chris, where did you land?
Yeah, I would say it's probably going to be pretty similar. Not quite to a 5. There were definitely maybe some parts that, well, and I guess this is coming from a place of ignorance. Like the stuff with the mom was more distracting at first than it was engaging. So that could be completely my fault. But yeah, in terms of ones that were engaging, in terms of movies that had a message, like everything that I'd look for in a movie, this was it. This had a lot to say. It was mostly engaging. It was pretty ambitious, and it emotionally affected me, whether because of how creepy it was, or just in terms of like thinking about my own propensity toward giving in and relinquishing self-control. I was like, I feel it. I understand this movie like on a deeper level. So put it pretty high, 4.6.7.
Look at you, Chris.
Yeah, I just gotta one up Henry is all.
Yeah,
But instant
that's
buds.
what's funny is I think I would probably say a 4.5 as well. So for me, I feel like the movie ages well, right? So one of the things that bothers me sometimes with the movie, and even with shows like The Office, is that what is wrong is not necessarily always indicated as such, right? So there may be humor, there may be something in the plot. We know it's wrong, but the story doesn't really give us a clear indication that the creators feel that way.
Sure.
And with the characters in this film, what I do appreciate is that even when you have people like Kenji Sahara's character, where he talks about how he's going to borrow mommy, like, you know, it's very clear that mentality of dehumanizing a woman is not justified. So I appreciate that, especially in our climate now. This is a film that I can watch and be like, okay, like, it's not problematic, which, you know, grace for, 50 years of progress in that. But
Sure.
I just think for me, the only reason why I wouldn't say it's perfect, and I'll have to go back with the whole mom thing, because again, I don't remember seeing that scene, but I could be wrong. So I don't want to grade it against that. But I do just feel like there's a few things that are strange, like when they see the half-human Matango creature. At first, he just kind of fades away. And then they're like, oh, well, was it really a ghost? Like, there's a few things like that where I'm like, the editing isn't necessarily where it should be compared to what we've seen in other films. I wouldn't call it a plot hole necessarily, but just stuff like that where I'm like, it takes me out of the movie a little bit. So I can't really like give it that full 5.
Well, it's one of those movies where it's just like, oh man, this would actually be really cool if they remade it,
And that's exactly it. So the first question we have is actually from the Black Swordsman 97, who brought up the Ultraman reference earlier. On Reddit, he asked, would a remake of this work? And I feel like we've covered that.
Yeah.
So if we could all choose a director that's not Guillermo del Toro, because, don't want to, Henry, I get it. Who would we choose to helm this project? Who must we see?
You know who I think would actually do this really well? I want to look them up because I'm terrible with names. But
What's my name?
David.
There we go.
The Duffer Brothers. The guys who brought Stranger Things to life.
Yeah,
I feel like they would have like a really good time with this movie. So like I think it does exactly what they do best, which is just like creepy surrealism. And like give it a message, and then they would have a oodles of fun. I think they would have a good time with this.
Yeah. How about you, Chris?
Well, I'm not one to watch too many movies, so if they've been directed a Star Wars recently,
George Lucas.
Yeah,
So-
I think Lucas
so-
would do a fantastic job with this.
So you mean Rian Johnson, right?
Yeah. Well,
That's a good way.
part of me is thinking like, I mean, this is still kind of a joke, but maybe the best answer I have is Taika, because Thor Ragnarok does deal with colonialism and impeding cultures a little bit. But, I mean, that's still a pretty crappy answer, and I'm not going to deny that.
I think if he had the right creative team, you could definitely get a film that has a good comedic flair with like a dark comedy.
Yeah.
I can see that working.
This would work very well as a dark comedy. Like, you know what would be fun? Like if this, like, I would say the Duffer Brothers, if they wanted to make it like a serious horror film, like if they wanted to really make it a scary, spooky film. But like at the same time, if it was remade, it would also probably be really fun to do it like Grabbers, which was the first A+ film we did for the show, which was about it's the Irish monster movie where the small Irish town realizes that the only way to survive an outbreak of vampiric squid monsters is to get drunk, because they get poisoned from the blood alcohol when they drink your blood. You know, you can have super fun times with like, you know, the mushroom people, but it is what it is.
Yeah. So for me, as much as I'd joke around and say I'd love to see the Coen brothers take this on, kind of have it like a Western in a sense would be interesting. So I know this is going to sound kind of odd, so bear with me here. I actually think it's kind of similar to what you're saying with Taika. If we had the right crew, I would love to see Edgar Wright take a stab at this.
Oh, I even thought about that too a little bit.
That actually would be fun.
Yeah. So the reason I say that is because in my head recently, so I saw Train to Busan, and with Edgar saying like that was the best zombie film he's ever seen, or at least recently, like that film itself is just incredible. But I just feel like Edgar Wright's one of those guys where like he knows how to create a good genre film.
Yeah.
So I feel like if you just had the right people, just then it kind of keep everything together, I feel like it would be a phenomenal film.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to think a little bit, not just, you know, as much as I'd love to see like Bong Joon-ho do that. Obviously he wouldn't remake a film, but that would be awesome though.
I highly doubt a Korean director would touch a Japanese property.
But if we ever needed a Korean director to do a Godzilla film, he would be our number one choice.
Sure.
No,
I don't know how much you know about the hatred between the Koreans and the Japanese, but sure, man.
I know. That was definitely a joke. So it wasn't a question as much. It was INKD Kaiju dude on Reddit. He just says, Matango is a surprisingly effective film that relies on slow burn / tension and the character's paranoia over just having monsters appear every so often. I always imagined what a Takashi Mike remake would have been like. You know, I'm not familiar enough with him
No, I'm not
to comment on that, but I appreciate that. Leaving a comment anyway. And then our last question, so this was on the Google Docs I shared with you guys. Jurassic_Subby asked, what would you guys do if you were stranded in that situation, which is Ichiro from All Monsters Attack running away from Gabra, which, Chris, I know that probably doesn't mean much to you, but what would you do if you were stranded on Monster Island and Gabra was after you?
Wait, is Gabby the one in the front, the little snake guy?
No, Gabra's the one in the back.
Yeah.
Man, this is a weird question because Chris doesn't know about the wonders of Gabra yet.
I know, but I had to ask. I didn't tell people what movie we were watching right off the bat, so I didn't get a lot of questions.
And you kept doing that, and I'm just like, I feel like David's like me. We can't really keep fun secrets well.
No. My wife can attest to that.
I don't know. I don't want to talk about it because Chris hasn't seen Gabra yet, and I just like the material wouldn't work. I mean, I love Gabra.
I think the only appropriate answer is that we would learn to fight our own battles.
Yeah, stop the bullies, stop the mafia. You know, make radios. Chris is like, what are you?
Yeah.
I'm
actually, while you're talking about the movie, I'm thinking about Monster Island dating sites. And instead of Tinder or Grindr, I'd call it Monster. And we could get them all set up with one another.
Anyway, this was fun.
Yeah.
You guys could just go off, I guess. You'll never work in this town again.
I'm barely working now.
So at this point of the episode, we discuss, we pour one out for our not necessarily favorite death, but the most memorable one. I think for me, last night I was gonna say it was the death of Ishiro Honda's ability to make passion projects.
Oh,
but
Wow.
Right. But then I thought about it more, and I'm like, dude, Koyama got shot like 100 times. Like that rifle had, it
Yeah.
was like freaking golden. I had like infinite bullets.
Yeah,
So
I was
I'm definitely
thank
gonna give
you.
it to Koyama.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also think the skipper's death. I just find his death really tragic. Like, just especially because, like, again, what this movie is crazy about is just like pointing out every taboo in Japanese culture, and suicide is definitely one of those taboos. So just the way that that's like, and as I said earlier, I think he represents traditional values, and to see traditional values do that is really prolific. So, especially because he's the one that's trying to, like, you know, the professor is positive, but he's the one that's trying to, like, keep them realistically alive, I guess.
That's interesting. And I'll make it brief, but like that, I'm thinking about Logan Paul or whoever when he went through the forest and he like commodified the suicide of that Japanese person, and now thinking about the American edition commodifying those values to make it a campy slapstick movie. Such an interesting thought. But on a lighter note, I like the idea of the odd job rifle too, because I was like sitting there and it's like, I don't know much about guns, but I don't think this is right. Right?
My guests also were like, do they not have to reload in Japan? Is that what kind of guns do they have on this boat?
Well, yeah. Like, what were they possibly needing that for?
I might be pulling this one out of nowhere, but also, is this the first time Toho uses that sound effect for guns?
I don't know, but it was so recognizable though.
Right, I think this is actually the first time Toho uses. Yeah, get ready for that noise all the time. It's the best.
Yeah, I probably not, because I know there was some shooting in Mothra. That was the first film where we actually got like people
Guns.
shooting at each other.
Gun violence.
Which, if there was no need to reload in Japan, I mean, the NRA would have no members left in the United States because everybody would move over there. So
I'm frat snapping. You can't hear it, but amen.
So thank you guys for tuning in and listening. Henry, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share before we part ways?
I think the thought I would like to share is just that this is a really great way to start December, I think. And I think this is just a really nice time to share with you two before David and I's little plan for Christmas comes into fruition. Because I know that David has it now. And Chris, I'm just so happy that you are game for this wonderful journey into Japanese cinema. And I think that you guys are going to have a very lovely holiday coming up. And I'm just so proud of you. So ever proud.
Thanks, Dad.
You're welcome. How do you like turtles?
I like turtles.
I like turtles. I like turtles and Star Wars.
This is the same kind of humor and fun we'll have when we're on your show later, right?
Oh, God. I still have to figure out what movie I want to put you two on. I know it's going to be a fun one. I like the,
and you'll have to mail us food since you feed all your other guests.
Well, Chris, just letting you know, I've actually talked to David. I can't do any Godzilla films with you guys because then it will break your whole flow.
If Henry's reference didn't make sense, we do have a special episode planned next time, which will be the first time that Chris and I actually meet after 7 years of being friends. So that's awesome.
Awkward.
So make sure that you not only tune in for that, but you also will need to tune in to Henry's podcast for his special
which I
episode
think
as well.
I'm grabbing Luba for that one.
Please do.
I think I'm going to try and get Luba and Zach
Phrasing.
for the time of our lives.
Yeah, it's it was really hard for me to choose a film.
Do you like suburban families?
I will say I really wanted you guys to watch Mac and Me. I was like, I don't think it would necessarily fit.
Not gonna lie, I thought about sending you guys Legally Blonde, but you know, that's not what you're getting, Chris.
No,
it's gonna be great. I just want every detail, all of it.
So, thank you guys so much for listening. The bumper will tell you where you can find us on all of our different social media platforms. But Henry, seriously, thank you so much for doing this. I'm glad we're able to get through this and not have to do a take 4.
This was recording, right? This was recording.
Yes, it is recording. We are good.
We have Chris's audio. We have my audio.
We sure hope so.
We have your audio.
No, we're good. We're good.
Delete podcast.
Yeah, see y'all tomorrow night for the next take.
Hey, it's David. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can listen to all of our episodes on most major podcast distributors, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and even YouTube. Links to all of our social media platforms, along with more information about the podcast hosts and the ability to financially support the podcast, can be found at www.thekaijuapostle.com. Hope to hear from you soon.